Welcome everyone to this webinar. My name is Sean Rohde. If you're just getting familiar with JDS, we are an awards and gifts and trophy components distributor. In this webinar, we're going to talk about CorelDRAW. So this webinar is going to be about an hour. We're going to spend about 45 minutes going over this tutorial, and then we're going to do a Q&A at the end. But this is so I'm a graphic designer and a sublimation specialist for JDS Industries. But this is not going to be sublimation focused. It's more going to be a CorelDRAW focused. So whether you're doing lasering or engraving or sandblasting, some sort of design, or whether you're just doing creating a logo for print, laying out an article, what have you, this is going to help you be more efficient at what you're doing. It's going to help you, maybe help you improve your designs and get you quicker at doing your projects and get you to the end result quicker. So we're going to touch on a lot of different subjects. First, we're going to do some text. We're going to do shortcuts for arranging design elements and layout, and we're going to do some color picking and color creation. I'm going to show you the best way, or at least a good way to do some of those things. What I'm going to show you is just a tiny fraction of all the tools in CorelDRAW, but like many of you, I use CorelDRAW. I use the program about 10% of it, 90% of the time. And these are some of the shortcuts and techniques that I use a lot. So to be sure, there will be future webinars with other shortcuts for some other things. We're going to just touch on a few things today. I'm going to be using CorelDRAW X7, but all the techniques that I'm going to use are pretty relevant to previous versions of CorelDRAW, going back many versions. If at some point there's something I'm going to show you that has changed or is a recent development, I'll try to let you know that as I do it. And I'll point that out. All right, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the simple tools that you're going to use when you're designing, and that's the nudge and some zoom tools. The nudge is located right up here in your property bar. This is a tool that I use quite often because I'm often moving elements around the space incrementally. So if you set this nudge for 1 inch or 2 inches or whatever it is, you can use your arrow keys right here to move those elements to the left, right, top, bottom, whatever it is, out of the way. And this is handy when you're doing, I use this a lot when I'm doing some complex designs. And I'm going to show you one design that I created that where this really came in handy. I'm going to zoom in on this little plaid pattern down here. This is a Scottish tartan. It's called the Armstrong plaid, but I recreated it in a vector art. So it's a repeatable pattern. But if I wanted to just identify a couple components of this plaid and I am having a hard time selecting that particular part of the graphic, I can use my node tool, or excuse me, my nudge distance to move things out of the way so I can easier access those components. So let's say if I have this graphic here is about 1 inch, it is 1 inch by 1 inch. If I set my node, or my nudge, excuse me, to 1.5 inches, I can move these elements out of the way like such to access some component of the design that I'm looking for. And that way, if I'm working on a particular piece of this design, I can always come back and move all those elements back to where they were just by using my nudge tool. So you can see you can move things out of the way. And this is a rather complex design, so if I just wanted to change one component, I could open up my Object Properties Manager and identify it that way, but this is just a quick way to do it, using the nudge tool to kind of push things out of the way incrementally. So when I'm finished, I can always bring all those components right back to where they were, so that my design is right back the way it was. Likewise, I'm going to use the hand tool to move over now. This is another tool that I want to explain a little bit. If you hit the letter H on your keyboard, it brings up this little hand tool. This will bring you can move your view over to another area of your document. So this is a pretty complicated logo right here. And again, if I wanted to just identify or choose a couple components, or if I want to look behind a particular object and I don't want to start digging in too far, I could just select parts of it, just kind of move it out of the way. Let's say if I want to access a little part of this here, I can do that just by moving things out of the way and getting access to them. Likewise, if this whole bird, I want to move that out of the way to get access to some of these components and modify them outside of this graphic here, I can do that. So if I just want to change a component or a color, I can do that off the logo. And then when I'm done, I can just bring things back to the way they were, and I know that they're going to be moved about 1.5 inches back to where they were. So a quick way to do that. I'm going to show you a couple other things here. I'm going to zoom out here, and zoom tools I use constantly. So let's say if I've moved myself away from my items being produced, and I'm out in nowhere land, and I can't figure out how to get back, I could always grab the zoom tool and zoom out, and then zoom back in to see where I'm at in this document. But a quick way to do that is just to hit F4. If you hit F4 on your keyboard, that brings everything in the document that's in your document, all the objects, puts them all into view. The other thing you can do, if you want to see the entire page or your entire document, and this particular document is 25 inches by 25 inches, I can do Shift F4, and that will put my entire document into view. So again, if you're just wanting to view these items that are in the document, just hit F4, it'll bring you back to that view. Also F3 is a zoom out tool, you can use that. So just a quick way to grab elements, because we're constantly moving around your document, arranging things, and sometimes you can get lost, or it can be kind of cumbersome to constantly go back up to your zoom tool, zooming out, zooming in. This is a quick way to get things in perspective. If you're going to select all objects on the page, if you need to move all these objects, shortcut for that is Control A, so you can select everything if you need to move everything out of the way for whatever reason. Also, if you want to create a square that's the exact size of your document, I'm going to zoom out here. Let's say for something, and I'm going to show you why this where this could be used, but if you just double click on this little square right here, it's going to make a square that's the exact size of your document. Now let's assume you're designing something that has a lot of white objects or white components in it. They're going to be difficult to see on a white background. So one thing you could do, you can just change the color of your background by double clicking this little, see this little shadow here behind your page? You can just double click that shadow and change the color of that shadow from the workspace. But I'm not going to do that here. What I'm going to do is take this box right here. I'm just going to change the color of it to gray. And now you can see there's some components that are, the white components can show up much more easily. The other thing I can do is right click on it and click Lock Object. And what that does, it allows you then to work on components without any fear that you're going to select that square in the background. So it's locked. So you cannot click it, you can't change it, you can't do anything until you right click on it again and unlock it. So if you have some areas that, like I said, some white components, this graphic here, this graphic that's around here, if you want to do anything to that and you want to keep it white, it's impossible to see on a white background. So this is a technique that I use when I'm working with those kind of things. Let's unlock that, and I'm going to delete it. Let's go to some alignment tools. These also, use them constantly. So one thing that CorelDRAW has done is that they've created a few tools that have a good mnemonic device. So as I zoom in here, you can see I've highlighted a few of these keys. When you're talking about how we align things, whenever you're designing or you're doing a page layout, you're always aligning things, either centering in them, left justifying, right justifying, put things at the top. You're going to be using your alignments. And if you're doing this through the menu bar, you can go up to Align and Distribute, and you can open this dialog box here. And then this will open up here, this little property bar. So as you click things, things will become highlighted, so you can use these components over here. And you can align and distribute this way as well. However, there are some shortcuts. Most of the time, you're going to be using just a few functions from this align and distribute. So let's zoom out here. All right, so I'm also going to get rid of this align and distribute so we can see some things a little closer here. This component, this one here, this is just a photograph or a bitmap. Here's some editable text, a couple of graphics that I've created, photograph here. Now if I'm arranging things, if I select something and I want to put it at the top or make it parallel with at the top of this box, if I click on a picture and then I shift click this box, a few things I can do. If I hit the letter T on my keyboard, that picture is going to be flush with that graphic. So if I pull a guideline down here, you can see it's exactly flush with that object. Now it'll do that with the last thing I select. So again with this, if I select this and this, all three things, and the last thing I select is this radio here, and I hit the letter T, all these things are going to be aligned at the top of this graphic because that's the last thing I selected. Okay, likewise, if I want to align to the left, align to the bottom, the right, it's T for top, B for bottom, L for left, R for right, C for center, P for putting things in the middle of the page. That's a nice mnemonic device for these shortcut tools, and I use these all the time. So let's say I want to put something in the middle of the page. I can just hit the letter P. It'll put it in the middle of the page. If I want to center all these objects together, whether it's a picture, a graphic, I can select them all by dragging all over all of them, hit the letter C. Or if I want it to be centered to a particular object, maybe I want all of them centered to this graph or to this photo here, I can make that the last thing I select. So if I select my radio, the square, the text, the triangle, and the last thing I select is the photo, hit the letter C, and it will center it that way. Likewise, it'll do the left and right. So if I select all of these, hit the letter L, they'll go to the left. Bottom, B. Really quick and simple. It's a lot faster than bringing up the entire dialog box to do that, because those are, quite frankly, the things you're going to use the most, is the aligning to a particular, to a top or bottom. Also, another thing you're going to do quite often is distributing objects evenly. So for instance, if I have these stars here, and I want to align them as they are these blue stars below, what I have to do is hit Shift and P, and it will equally space all of these objects. Same thing going vertically. I can select all these objects and hit Shift A. It'll do the same thing. It will align them all based on their centers. So it'll look and be distributed just like that. It used to be the shortcut for opening up that dialog box, by the way, if you're opening up Align and Distribute, was Shift or Control AA. Now it is Shift Control A, or again, you can find it up here in your Object, Align, Distribute, and there you have it. And if you're looking for whatever shortcut, if you need to find out what the shortcut is, whenever you select a menu or a tool off the menu, you're going to see its shortcut right here. So it's a nice practice to force yourself to use these shortcuts because it does, excuse me, save time over the course. I wish I had known all about all these shortcuts when I had first started CorelDRAW. I could have saved hundreds of hours by now. And these, again, are the things that I wish I had known when I first started almost 20 years ago. All right, so let's take a look at the next option here, the Shape tool. So this is oftentimes what I call the node tool. It's located right here. It's also it's the Shape tool, and the shortcut for this is F10. So a few things you can do with this. One thing I like to do quite often in an object that has a lot of different nodes, I'm going to zoom in on this star right here. And by the way I created this star is through the polygon tool, which is located usually right down here below the square and the ellipse, or the rectangle tool rather. So here's your polygon tool. You could also use the star tool. There's also complex. I'm going to use I'll actually use the star tool. If I hold the Shift key down or the Control key down, and I blow this up a little bit, it's going to create it proportionally. And up in the property bar, I can add points, and I can also adjust where those points are by modifying this button right here. I can also, if I do select my node tool or my shape tool, which is F10, I can simply grab a point and start modifying this because it's still a shape. Now if I change this to an object, I lose that option. So if I take a square, same thing. If I make a square or rectangle, this is not, I can't adjust these nodes individually until I change it to an object. And the shortcut for that is Control Q. But let's say if I take my node tool, I can't just modify one node here because it's still a square or a rectangle. If I change it to object, that's Control Q, then I can modify each node individually. But let's get back to this here. If I have my node tool, which is F10, that's the shortcut, and I select and I click on the Alt key with that tool, I can select nodes freehand. So I can just kind of move around here. These nodes would be a little trickier to select without this. So the only way to do that, to select those nodes that are inside, there would be to use the Shift key. Another way to do this, if I had my shape tool, I could select these, but then I'd have to grab my Shift key to add nodes. So then I drag over some more, and I can drag over this one, and maybe this one, and slowly work my way around this object if I wanted to just select the inner nodes. But with the Alt key, that makes it much more simple to simply just freehand it around there. And if I wanted to just select the nodes inside that star on the inner portions, I could do that. Just like this. And I let go, and now just the inner nodes are selected. And then I can take those and move just those nodes together. All right. Also, if you have your node tool and you double click on this tool up here in the menu bar, it'll select all the nodes at once. All right, a little shortcut for that. Fillet and scallop and chamfer. I do use this quite often if I'm creating a border around an edge of something, but basically what this is, and this is a polygon star over here, I'll identify what that, with this tool, what that does. If you just have a square and you want to create a rounded corner, scallop corner, what I call dog, this is dog ears down here, scallop, or a notch, or a rounded corner. In previous versions, if you selected the square, those options, if you click on F10, your shape tool, these options will come up here as well in your property bar. This happened from about X5, I believe. Prior to that, you'd have to go looking for them. So let's say I have a square here and I go up to, I'd have to go up to Window, Dockers, and you're looking for Fillet, Scallop, Chamfer. And in here you can adjust, first you can select Fillet, Scallop, Chamfer here. You can adjust what the radius is that you want it to do, and you can hit apply. I'm going to make a little bit more. I'm going to do a 1/4 inch on this one. And you can see you can quickly round the corners on there. Now if you want to do it freehand, you can. You can select your shape tool, F10, and just do it freehand. You can pull and just round those corners or chamfer them, depending on what you want to do. Round, chamfer. This one I'm going to do a scallop, 0.25. Okay, and the other thing that does, it actually shows you, if I want to chamfer it, it actually shows you in later versions, I believe this started in X7, it'll actually show you what it's going to do before you apply it. So it gives you that, see that little blue arrangement around that. Shows you what's going to happen before you even apply it. So you may want to change it on the fly. If that's too much of a dog ear, you can change that down to, let's say, a 1/16 of an inch, which is 0.625. And you make a smaller dog ear. I'll zoom in so you can see what that looks like. Okay. All right, now this is a polygon. This is where it really works well when you're trying to do rounded corners on the inside area of a shape. So pretty easy to round the corners externally, but on the inside corners, this would be very difficult to do manually. Same option, you can go up to fillet if you want to round the corners. See it, they're showing me what's going to happen if I do this. I'm going to do a little bit less here. I'm going to do a 1/16 of an inch on this one as well. Hit apply, and it will round the inside corners. Likewise on other graphics, so this is a fill. It'll do it on a fill. It'll do it on a line. So here's a line. If I want to round the corners on that, I can. This is a fill. It'll do it on fill. And again, where you have inside corners, that's always tricky to do if you're doing this by hand. But the fillet, scalp, and chamfer tool is very handy to do that on the fly. And again, with the later versions, you can do that. If it's a shape like a square, you can do that on the fly. If it's a complicated design like this one's hand-drawn, you no longer get those options. If you switch to F10, those options do not occur up here. So you would have to open up your dialog box over here to modify that. All right. Working with text. Now, if you're working with text, like a lot of us, whenever you're doing something in design, almost half of your time is spent working with text. And it's nice to know what your options are with text. For instance, if you're doing some sort of a layout, an article, a flyer, and you have a large body of text, one of the things especially if you want to encompass it into a particular shape, you could do this the manual way. But if you take this block of text here, this paragraph text, and you right-click on it, and you bring it over a closed graphics, watch my cursor as I get to that. It becomes crosshairs. If I let go, I get a bunch of options here. And if I want to, I could power clip it, or I could just place text inside, and it'll drop it right inside there. Also, notice what happens when I do this. Again, I'm going to pull it over to the graphic, crosshairs, let go, place text inside. You see this little leftover graphics over here? This is not actually here. You can't click on that. This is just a remnant of what it was before. If you see that, just hit Control-W. That will refresh your screen so that it disappears. It's not actually there. It's just your screen is remembering it's there or was there, and it's just a remnant of what you just did. All right. Another thing you can do with paragraph text, especially if you have a rather large article, is you can take your graphic or your photographs and allow them to wrap around your text. So let's say I have this photo here. If I right-click on it, I get a lot of options in here. One of them is Wrap Paragraph Text. So I'm going to select that, and watch what happens when I bring this paragraph text down to that article or that photo. See how that text just wraps around that image? I'm going to show you what this looks like in a larger example of this. This is an article that was written about JDS about a year ago. This has a lot of text in it, and if I wanted to feed this photograph into this article, I would do the same thing. By the way, if you're wanting to make columns in a large body of text, you can do that. You just go into your text columns, and right now I've got 5 columns. I could reduce that to 4 if I wanted to. It also, you can adjust the width of the columns and the amount of gutter, which is the space in between columns right here. If I click OK, now it's 4 columns. But if I take this photograph and I want to shove it into that article, but I want to maneuver this photo within the article and have the text wrap around it, I do the same thing. I'm going to select Wrap Paragraph Text. Now with a lot of text, it's going to chug along a little slowly. So watch as I push this article in here. It's having to do a lot of thinking right now. So go slow and be patient with CorelDRAW because there is a lot of text that's moving around right now. All right, I'm going to drop it right about there. Actually, I'm going to move it over just a little bit. Now, as you have it dropped in there, you can increase the size. It'll still continue to wrap text around that article. You'll notice sometimes if you make things too big, you're going to see this red line come around your, that means that your text has been squished a little too far and that your article or your photograph has pushed the text beyond the limits of this paragraph box. And you'll also see that down here with this little arrow. That means you have to make this box a little bit bigger, or either that or make your photograph a little smaller. So I'm going to make this a little smaller so that I don't get that red line, so all my text can fit into this text box. Now if you want to modify how much space is occurring around this photograph, this little option up here in your property bar, click this and you can modify how far around this photograph the text will wrap. Okay. And you can do that with anything, not just photograph. You can do that with an object. I'm going to make a little circle here. So let's say you had a logo that you wanted to place in here. Again, you can right-click on it, Wrap Paragraph Text, and it will maneuver around there. Okay. Fit text to path. This is a question I get a lot. In very early versions, this was kind of a clunky tool. It has since been advanced quite a ways, and I really like the way that they have what they've done with this. Since X4, this has changed quite a bit. So if you have an earlier version, if you have X3 or 12, 11, the way you would normally fit text to path, you'd select your text, you would shift select the object, then you'd go up to text, click fit text to path. Now you can still do it that way, but if you wanted to put this text on the bottom of the arc, in older versions, all that would be up here in the property bar. They've since made this a lot easier, and I believe it's since X4. So if you want to move this to the bottom, really all you have to do is just grab the text and pull it to the bottom. And if you notice there's a little red line there, that tells you when it's either perfectly on top or at a 90 degree. So here it's perfectly centered at the bottom, perfectly centered on the right, or the top. Okay, so if I pull this down to the bottom, now most of the time you're not going to want to have text in reverse upside down, so you will have to modify from there, and that's where you go back up to your property bar and you want to reverse and flip it. Now when I do that, it goes to the inside of the circle. Just go ahead and grab that text, pull it down. Now when I do that, this is something that gets missed a lot of the time. You notice how this text up here, when it's on top, the spacing increases between the letters. Down below, it decreases. So you'll want to, if you want to have the text on top match the same spacing as on the bottom, you'll have to modify that. And to do that, you may want to bring up your text properties, which is Control-T. And from there, you can control the spacing, letter or character spacing here. You can control word spacing, etc. So if I wanted to, let me show you that one more time here. I'm actually going to copy and paste this so you can show it, so I can show you the top and the bottom. So if I select the text and then shift select this, I can put it on top. Here's the shortcut for this. And again, this is fairly recent. I think X4, this is something you could do. You can right click on the text. Remember how before we came over to the graphic and we got those crosshairs? We can do that again, and this time we can select fit text to path. So that's a shortcut to do that. Now once I've done it, I can't do it again for whatever reason, but you can add more text to the bottom. So let's say I want to bring this to the bottom and I want to continue putting more text on top. In this instance, I would have to, I don't think it'll let me do the shortcut to do it. Maybe it will. No, it won't give me the option to arc it. But if I shift select that object, I can still go back up to text and fit text to path. So then I can have it arced top and bottom. If I need to modify the size of the text, I can either highlight the entire piece or I can just increase it to whatever it is I need to increase it to from the property bar. And I can still bold and do a couple things with it, whatever I want to do. All right. Kind of dovetailing off of that concept, kerning, tracking, leading, letter spacing, there are shortcuts for this too. And I'm going to zoom in here. If I select my shape tool, which is F10 on the keyboard, F10, and I select this this text right here, you notice these two little options pop up. If you just grab one of these, you can freehand increase the spacing between the letters. Okay. This one here adjusts the leading, and I'll show you how that works in a moment. If I hold the Shift key down and then grab this one, it controls the spacing between the words. I can also do that over here in my text properties, but if I just want to do it on the fly, that's what these are for. Okay. And a lot of people call this kerning, and I call it kerning too, but quite honestly, kerning really refers to the space between two individual letters. So if you hear the word tracking or letter spacing and kerning, sometimes those three words are kind of used as the same thing. But kerning really is the space between two pairs of letters. You notice if I type the word pave, I've typed that out right here, it looks equally spaced, but in fact it's not. I'm going to zoom in here so you see what I mean. If I took and pulled out a guideline, you can see that the P and the A overlap just slightly. They also overlap slightly between the A and the V, but there's a bit of a gap between the V and the E. That happens naturally as you type. It actually happens naturally as you write handwriting. You're in freehand. It naturally kerns letters. Now if I equally spaced these letters, as I did here, you can see these are individual letters. If I equally space these letters, this is what happens. These two are exactly right, touching the end of the P and the bottom of that A are right on the guideline. So this has been, each one of these has been spaced perfectly, but it doesn't look optically correct. So that's what kerning does. So if you find that a particular font does not kern the way you want it to, you can modify that. And you could do that if you hit the F10 key, that's your shape tool again. You can do that on the fly if you want. You can grab a node and move that, or you can do the whole thing and move it as I've shown before. Let's go back to a leading shortcut. This is 2 lines. So changing the leading, that refers to the space between the top sentence and the bottom sentence. And again, if I select F10, it gives me those 2 handles. I can do this on the fly. I can adjust the distance between the the two sentences here, or not sentence, between the two words. If I hit the F8 key, or if I just double click on this, return and start typing, it's going to keep that leading the same as well. So again, F10 short key changes that on the fly. You could also do that within the text properties, but if you just want to do that quickly, you can do that. That's your shortcut. You can do it on paragraph text as well. So I'm going to zoom in on this, hit the F10 key. You'll see those handles exist here as well. And there it's adding more space in between the letters, or adding more space between words, or adding more space between the sentences, or between the lines of text. All right. Also, if you wanted to open up your text properties, I think I mentioned that earlier, it's Control-T. Let's go to some quick little shortcuts here. I don't use this one quite often, but I often think I wish I could remember it when I needed it. This one's a hard one to remember, but if I highlight a group of text, Control-Shift-K, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. Control-Shift-K will change it to small caps. Control-Shift-K again will change it back. I don't use it quite often, but I often wish I could remember that because it's a lot harder to, it's a lot longer process to do that without the shortcut. Double-clicking the text tool. I'm going to zoom out here. If I double-click this text tool right here, it selects all my text. So if I want to change the color of all my text at once, I can easily do that by doing that, double-clicking on that tool right there. Now, if I have text, let's say I have two groups of text and I group them together, which is Control-G, so these two are now grouped together. If I have them grouped and I then double-click on the A, it will not select the two that are grouped. So just be aware of that. If you're trying to select text and you have things grouped, it will not select them. Shortcut to select all text on a page. Okay, we just talked about that. Double-clicking the rectangle tool. We talked about that earlier. Again, I'm gonna make a new document here to show you what that is. Double-clicking on the rectangle tool gives you that square that's the exact size of your document, whatever the default is, or whatever your page size is. In this, it's 25 by 25, so it creates a 25 by 25 box. We're running a little short on time. I'm going to skip this one here. We'll come back to that if we have time. This is an interesting one. This is a good way to color match if you're having difficulties. And this is a situation that I had a customer. The customer of ours said that their customer sent in some artwork, and it was very well done. It was perfectly vectorized. Here's the artwork right here. But the problem was that the colors weren't coming out right. And this was a sublimation situation, but this could be applied to many different options. If you have a PC, you have something called a snipping tool. The customer sent in this art, but it wasn't matching what they're seeing on the website. So not that every monitor is going to be the same, but it needed to be something closer to what the customer was seeing. So I'm going to show you a quick way to use a snipping tool. First, I'm going to go to that actual website. All right, now if you don't know where your snipping tool is, here's the website here. If you don't know where your snipping tool is, it's located in your programs from your start button, and you can go to accessories, and in here you'll find something called a snipping tool. Now a lot of times, if I have used a tool like this quite often, I'll right click on it and pin it to my taskbar. So here it's now pinned to my taskbar. So if I select this, or I can also, I use it so often it's up here in my snipping tool. If I do this, I can just snap a picture of whatever it is on my screen. Now you can also do just a regular screenshot and it'll do the same exact thing, but this gives you a little more control. I want to cancel that. This website does flash that graphic every once in a while, so we're going to try to capture that. But right now I'm just going to snap a picture of this because I think I can take that color right off of these hockey players over here. So once I've done that, I'm going to do File, Save As, and we'll just call it Web Shot. Click Save. Now go back to your CorelDRAW and Control V, paste it in there. I'm going to shrink this down to about 10% of its original size so I can manage it a little better. So there's what I've done. Here it is a little bit bigger. But that's basically a screenshot that I took. Now, once I've done that, I can use the colors within this graphic. Using my eyedropper tool to pull the colors from that snapshot to whatever it is I want it to do. All right, let's say that this is the snapshot. This is the colors I want to capture in the graphic. Here's the vector graphic that the customer sent. But these colors were not correct. These blues are a little more complex, a little kind of a dirty blue, but it needed to be a brighter, lighter blue. So we can use the eyedropper tool right here to take colors from that snapshot, and it turns into a paint can. Earlier versions you'd have to go back and grab the bucket as well, but this automatically changes it to the paint can. I just start clicking on the areas that need to be changed. And once those changes were made, that was a lot closer to what the customer needed. It may not be exact, but it's very close. And the other thing I'm going to show you is how to color pick and create colors even more specific than this. So let's say once the customer has done this, they print it out and it's not quite exactly the match that they wanted to. Maybe there's an actual PMS color they're trying to match. So one thing you can do is create your own custom palettes. This is something that's really kind of unique to CorelDRAW. You can't do this in Illustrator or Photoshop as easily as you can here. I'm going to take two different graphics. So these are different palettes that I've created, and I've created thousands of color palettes to use for the customers that if they're saying trying to match a particular color. Let's say a customer brings in a mitten or a jacket or some other product that they want to try to match. This is the way you could do that. You could either present a PMS color swatch book, but you can't always get those PMS colors to work with every process you're working with. So you might want to create your own color palettes and then match them up to a PMS color. So right now I'm using an RGB mode. So let's say I want to create a blend of reds. So in this, what I would do is just create two different colors. And these are basically just two different boxes. Create a square. You could even create a star here. And I'm going to use the blend tool. The blend tool is a tool that was really kind of a design tool, but we're going to use this as a way to create color. So if I take this square and change that to red, I take the star and I change it to, let's say, a darker purple color or a plum. Now I don't need to have the outlines, so I'm going to right click on this little X here to get rid of the outlines. So I have this object and this object. I'm going to go ahead and use the blend tool, which is generally located right in this area here. So if you have a drop shadow or a contour tool, it's usually in this flyout. You just click this little arrow and you'll find different tools within here. So if I click on the blend tool and I click this object and I drag over to this object, you can see that it changes from a square to a star incrementally. Up here in your property bar, you can say how many steps you want to do that. I'm going to choose 60 steps. Now if I break these apart, which is Control K, and ungroup them, each one of these becomes its own little separate object. You can see how it's kind of morphing from a square to a star. Well, in order to make some colors from this, I can just select them and go to Window, Color Palettes, Create Palette from Selection. And by default, it's going to go into a folder called My Palettes. So I'm going to call this Webinar Color. Click Save. Now it's going to drop it into my workspace right here. The next step is to go into Tools, Macros, Run Macro. Earlier versions of CorelDRAW, I believe X4, you had to click Play. So once this opens up, you're going to have this little dialog box here. You're going to go into Global Macros, and you'll see this option pop up. It's called Create Color Swatch. Click Run. Another dialog box will open up. Now, sometimes it'll populate something you didn't anticipate. So in order to get to that file that we just created that's in My Palettes, you're going to go to Open. And generally speaking, it's going to be into Documents, My Palettes. Now, if you don't see anything here, make sure you go down to this little menu and select All Files. And I called this, you can see all the different files I've created. Webinar Color, click Open. And I'm going to reduce the spacing here to about 5. Click OK. Now right now CorelDRAW is thinking, there it goes, so it's populating, and the reason I chose 60 different units and 5 for the spacing is because that's about the maximum I can fit onto one 8.5 by 11 page. Now within here, I know that right in here, there's some really good reds that match up to about PMS 200 to 286, somewhere right in there. That's a lot of good reds right there. So this is a tool that I use quite often. And then what I would do is actually print this, and if I'm doing sublimation, I would sublimate it. If I was just doing just printing for a flyer, I'd print this out so I could see exactly what those colors look like. This one happens to be in the RGB color mode, but you can do it for CMYK. You could do it for PMS colors. You could do it for your workspace colors, whatever those are. Be aware that if you do this for a PMS color swatch, some of those can get really large. So make sure you have a lot of RAM if you're going to do one of those, because it does a lot of processing. It could end up being 6, 7, 20 pages for PMS colors. So be careful when you're doing some of these. It could take a while, it could crash, but if it's just doing a couple pages, it does it pretty quickly. I'd like to open this up for some Q&A. One thing that popped up here, and this was a question that came through, and this is actually a good question. A customer of ours sent in some artwork. They're trying to create some artwork for production. It was a recipe card from, I don't know if it was from grandmother's recipe card. So Stacy sent in some artwork and wanted to know how to improve it for output for either, and I can't remember if it was lasering or engraving, but either way, I'd like to show you how to do that since we have time. This is a little bit involved, but I'm going to open up Corel Photopaint. This is X8, by the way, but it's not going to be any different from many versions. I used to do this when I first started using CorelDRAW because we would get a lot of artwork that was quite disastrous, quite frankly, and that still happens today. Now this artwork that the customer sent in, and she just sent this before the webinar. So one of the things she was asking is how can she reproduce this for an output when it looks this bad? And you can see as you zoom in, it's pretty choppy. What I used to do, and what I still do occasionally, is a technique that it doesn't really, you're not going to find this technique in any kind of CorelDRAW video, but one thing I like to do is just increase the amount of dots per inch to 600. Let's go 600. It was 200. Click OK. Now what that'll do, it's not going to really clean anything up, but what it does do is add a lot more dots. So when I start to modify this, it has something to work with. So you can see it's added a lot of extra dots around the edges of here. Still pretty choppy. This is a pretty low-res image. But what I like to do with this, I'm going to change the mode of this image. Right now it's an RGB. I'm going to change it to grayscale. I'm going to leave it as the default. The first thing I'm going to do is increase the contrast a little bit so I can get rid of some of these little gray areas around here. Let's reset that. Increase the contrast. Click OK. Now it still has a pretty choppy edge. So if I go up to Effects and Blur and do the Gaussian blur, and you don't have to go all the way to here, just a few pixels. Just blur it slightly. Click OK. Then go back up and increase the contrast again, 100%. OK. Then go and do the opposite with the negative image. Go to Image, Transform, Invert, and then go and blur it a little bit. Then I'm going to go and adjust the contrast again. Now if I increase the brightness, that's going to fatten up those letters when it's inverted. And I want to do that. Click OK. Now let's go back and invert it again. Okay, so you notice how that choppy edge is starting to get smoothed out. That's because we added dots per inch and we started to blur that a little bit, so it's kind of filling in some of those areas. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. And the next step is to vectorize it. So if I want to bring this into CorelDRAW, let's import that image. This is the one that I had done earlier. I want to zoom in so we can see. So the edges are still they're still pixelated, but they're a lot better than they were. They weren't the hard pixel edges. So then what we do is we would take this into, I like to use the trace bitmap option, outline trace, and my favorite is the detailed logo because it gives me a lot more control. If the resolution is really high, you may have to click on reduce bitmap and then bring that in, and it will vectorize the whole thing. Now this is a pretty complicated image, so it's going to take a little while to do, but you can control the amount of detail, the smoothing of the edges, the corner smoothing, and what it's doing is it's producing a vector image of this recipe so that you can use it for lasering or sandblasting, or it'll clean up some of the edges. If you see some missing pieces in here, go ahead and crank up the detail. Okay, see how that did that? Then you can click OK, and it's basically vectorized. That is the way I would clean up bad artwork. If it was a really high resolution image, you probably wouldn't have to do that technique where I invert it, blur it, add contrast. But that is how you do it. If you have a really poor image, you can add the resolution and then adjust the contrast, blur, add contrast, blur, and go back and forth between those steps. So thanks for attending. If you do have some questions, like I said, our tech support, we got 5 people in our office. This is our direct line. It's 855-782-4657. You can also contact if you need to purchase one of the printer kits. That number is 800-843-8853. You can also email us, sublimation@jdsindustries.com, if you want to email a question. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on the YouTube. I want to pop open the YouTube for just a moment so you can see what that looks like. Here's our YouTube channel. Now, if you're looking for some of the features that we did today, there's a few of them in here already. Expect that the entire webinar will be archived and put up here at some point in the future. But if you're looking for tutorials, there's lasering, there's CorelDRAW tutorials. in here already. So if you need to find something, take a look in there, you might find it, or just give us a call, we'll be able to explain it as well. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you at the next webinar.